Imagine walking into a place you visited for years, only to be mocked and humiliated, just because of your age. That's exactly what happened to Henry, a kind old man who only wanted a cup of coffee. But what the rude cashier didn't know, karma was watching, and what happened next left the entire cafe speechless. Stay with me, because this story will remind you why treating people with respect always matters. The bell above the door jingled softly as Henry Wallace stepped into his favorite cafe, the familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries wrapping around him like a comforting embrace. The walls were adorned with cheerful artwork, and the soft hum of conversations created a welcoming ambiance. Henry paused for a moment, allowing memories to wash over him. Years spent here, sharing laughter with colleagues and students alike. He smiled, recalling the many faces that had come and gone, each leaving a mark on his heart. As he walked towards the counter, he noticed the young cashier, Jessica Carter, tapping her fingers impatiently on the register. She looked up, her expression shifting from boredom to annoyance as Henry approached. He could sense the tension in her demeanor, but chose to brush it off. "Good morning," he greeted warmly, his voice carrying the gentle lilt of experience. Jessica rolled her eyes, barely masking her disdain. "What do you want?" she snapped, her tone sharp and dismissive. Henry's smile faltered, but he remained composed. "Just a coffee, please, black," he replied, reaching for his worn leather wallet. "Cash? Seriously?" Jessica scoffed, glancing at the line of customers behind him. "You know we have card machines, right? Or are you just too old to figure it out?" A few customers nearby chuckled, and Henry felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment. He could sense the judgment hanging in the air, but he took a deep breath, refusing to let her words shatter his dignity. Well, I'm a bit old-fashioned," he said, forcing a chuckle to lighten the mood. "But cash still works just fine." He placed a few crumpled bills on the counter, trying to maintain his grace amidst the ridicule. Jessica snatched the money with an exaggerated flourish, her smirk widening as she turned to the next customer. "Next!" she called out, leaving Henry standing there, the laughter of a few patrons echoing in his ears. He felt small and unimportant, yet he held his head high, reminding himself that he had weathered far worse storms in life. As Michael Brooks settled deeper into his seat, he couldn't shake the growing unease he felt watching the interaction between Henry and Jessica. The cafe buzzed around him, but all he could focus on was the elderly man being belittled by a cashier who clearly lacked respect. Michael leaned back, memories flooding his mind, like vivid snapshots, of Henry, the kind schoolteacher who had instilled in him not just knowledge but also values of empathy and respect. "Come on, Jess, cut him some slack," he muttered under his breath, hoping she might hear the unspoken plea. But Jessica, oblivious to the weight of her actions, continued her tirade, rolling her eyes as she stashed her gum into the corner of her mouth. "Seriously, how hard is it to get your money ready? It's not rocket science." She laughed, her voice dripping with sarcasm, while some of the other patrons chuckled uncomfortably. Michael clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath his calm exterior. He remembered the times Henry had taken the extra effort to ensure each student felt valued, especially those who struggled. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he thought, his resolve hardening. He couldn't just sit back and watch this man, an icon of their community, be treated like this. Just then, Jessica reached out, snatching Henry's crumpled bills from his trembling hands. "Next time, maybe try using a card, old man," she quipped, her voice a mocking sing-song. The laughter that followed felt like daggers to Michael's heart. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor, drawing the attention of nearby customers. "Excuse me," Michael's voice boomed, cutting through the cafe chatter. "Do you even realize who you're talking to?" He felt adrenaline course through him as he stepped closer to the counter, his gaze locked on Jessica, who now wore a look of confusion mixed with defiance. "Who cares? It's just some old dude," she scoffed, dismissing the tension in the air. "No, Jessica, he's not just some old dude. That's Henry Wallace," Michael replied, his tone firm. "He's a retired school teacher who has dedicated his life to shaping this community, and my life in particular." He could feel the eyes of the cafe patrons on him. Their curiosity piqued as he continued. "He taught me more than just math and history. He taught me kindness, respect, and how to be a decent human being." The laughter faded, replaced by an uncomfortable silence as the reality of Michael's words began to sink in. Henry stood there, his face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and gratitude, but it was Jessica's expression that intrigued him the most. She looked momentarily stunned, her bravado slipping away as the realization of her actions began to dawn on her. As the tension in the cafe escalated, the manager, a stout man named Greg, strode forward with determination. his brow furrowed in disapproval. The hum of conversation quieted as he approached the counter, his voice steady but firm. "Jessica, step aside. This is unacceptable behavior." Jessica's eyes widened, her bravado faltering under Greg's authoritative gaze. "But I was just—" "No excuses," Greg interjected, cutting her off. "You don't treat customers like that, especially not someone as respected as Mr. Wallace." He gestured towards Henry, who stood at the counter, his cheeks flushed with a mix of embarrassment and indignation. The cafe patrons shifted in their seats, leaning closer, captivated by the unfolding drama. At that moment, Michael Brooks rose from his table, his posture commanding attention. "Everyone, if I could have your attention," he called out, his voice resonating throughout the cafe. The murmurs quieted as patrons turned to him, curiosity piqued. "I think it's important you all know who you're looking at." He pointed towards Henry, a broad smile breaking across his face. "This man is not just a customer. He is a beloved former teacher who shaped the lives of many of us here." Gasps of surprise rippled through the cafe. "Henry Wallace?" one woman exclaimed, her hand flying to her mouth in recognition. "He taught my daughter," Michael continued, his tone earnest and heartfelt. "Mr. Wallace taught me when I was struggling in school. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. His kindness and dedication changed my life forever." He paused, allowing his words to sink in, the cafe now enveloped in a heavy silence. If this story is already making you feel something, imagine how many others need to hear this lesson. Hit the like button right now so more people can see this powerful message. And tell me in the comments, have you ever seen karma work this fast? Let's share these moments together. One by one, customers began to share their own stories, voices rising in a chorus of admiration. "He helped me with my reading," another patron chimed in. "I remember how he stayed after school just to help me," a young woman added, her eyes shining with gratitude. As the stories flowed, Jessica's confidence crumbled. She felt the weight of the collective disappointment bearing down on her. The once vibrant cafe now transformed into a space of reverence for the man she had mocked. The atmosphere shifted palpably, leaving her isolated in her shame. Greg stood beside Henry, a protective presence, while Michael's voice rang with conviction. "Let this be a lesson in respect. We must lift each other up, not tear one another down." The crowd murmured in agreement, their newfound respect for Henry palpable. Jessica, realizing the gravity of her actions, stared at the floor, her heart pounding with dread as the realization of her mistake set in. Jessica's bravado crumbled as she stood frozen in place, her cheeks flushing a deep crimson. The realization of her misdeeds hit her like a wave and she stammered, I didn't mean to. I was just having a bad day." Her voice trembled, and she glanced around at the disapproving faces of the cafe patrons, who were no longer amused by her antics. Michael stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "A bad day doesn't excuse treating people with disrespect, Jessica. Henry here is not just a customer. He's a cherished member of this community. You might not realize it, but he's shaped lives, including mine." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. "What do you mean?" Jessica asked, her earlier arrogance replaced with confusion and fear. "He's just an old man." "Just an old man?" Michael's tone sharpened. "Henry Wallace taught me how to read when I struggled. He stayed after school to help me, even when I was ready to give up. His kindness made me who I am today." The cafe patrons nodded in agreement, murmurs of support rippling through the crowd. The manager, who had been silently observing the scene unfold, finally intervened. His voice was firm as he addressed Jessica. "This behavior is unacceptable in my establishment. Respect is a fundamental part of our community, and you've violated that trust. I'm afraid I have to let you go." Jessica's heart sank as the reality of her situation dawned on her. "Please, I didn't mean it," she pleaded, the fight leaving her voice. "I was just trying to get through my shift." The manager shook his head, his expression resolute. "Your actions have consequences, Jessica. You need to learn that treating others with kindness is vital, especially in a place where people come to feel welcome." As the cafe patrons began to whisper among themselves, sharing their own stories of Henry's impact, Jessica felt the weight of their collective disappointment press heavily on her shoulders. She stood there, feeling smaller than she ever had, her heart racing as she realized how her careless words had led her to this moment of humiliation. Meanwhile, Henry, who had been quietly absorbing the situation, felt a mixture of sadness and compassion for the young woman before him. He remembered his own moments of folly and the lessons he had learned throughout his life. His heart ached for her, even as he savored the respect being shown to him by the community. The cafe erupted in applause, the sound echoing against the walls as Henry Wallace stood, a mixture of surprise and gratitude washing over him. Michael Brooks, with a warm smile, stepped forward, his voice clear and confident. Today we celebrate not just a remarkable teacher, but a man who has shaped countless lives. Let me get the coffee for you, Henry. Henry, still processing the whirlwind of emotions, nodded appreciatively, his heart swelling at the support of the community he loved so dearly. Thank you, Michael. But really, it's not necessary, he started. But Michael was already at the register, making a gesture of respect that Henry couldn't refuse. Meanwhile, Jessica Carter stood frozen behind the counter, her bravado shattered into fragments of shame. The laughter that once echoed around her now turned into whispers of disapproval. As she watched the crowd rally around Henry, a wave of realization crashed over her. With a deep breath, Henry turned to Jessica, his voice gentle yet firm. You know, Jessica, we all make mistakes. I hope you take this moment to reflect on how our words affect others. His eyes, kind and wise, searched hers for understanding. Life has a way of teaching us lessons, often when we least expect them. Jessica felt her cheeks flush as she averted her gaze, the weight of his words pressing down on her. I didn't mean to. I just thought, she stammered, struggling to find the right words. The reality of the moment struck her. Her actions had consequences, and she had underestimated the power of kindness and respect. The café, filled with a mix of celebration for Henry and disappointment for Jessica, created a poignant atmosphere. Patrons exchanged knowing glances, their faces softening with empathy for the young cashier. The warmth that enveloped Henry contrasted sharply with Jessica's growing isolation. Just think about what you want to become, Jessica, Henry urged, his voice imbued with a quiet strength. Everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow. He smiled at her, a beacon of hope and understanding, leaving her to navigate the storm of her own making. As Henry stood by the café door, gathering his thoughts and preparing to leave the whirlwind of emotions behind, he felt a light tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Michael Brooks approaching him, a warm smile spreading across his face. Henry, he said, his voice filled with enthusiasm, I've been meaning to talk to you. Your impact on my life was profound, and I think the community needs to hear your story. Would you consider speaking at our upcoming event? Henry's heart swelled with gratitude. I'd be honored, Michael. It's been a long time since I've shared my experiences with anyone. He paused, reflecting on the many students he had taught over the years. I've always believed in the power of education to change lives. Just as a renewed sense of purpose began to blossom within him, the cafe door swung open again, revealing Jessica. Her face, once filled with arrogance, now bore the weight of regret. She took a tentative step forward, her voice trembling. Mr. Wallace, I'm really sorry. I've been dealing with some tough family issues and I took it out on you. I shouldn't have treated you that way. Henry studied Jessica's face, searching for sincerity. It's important to acknowledge our mistakes, Jessica. We all have struggles, but that doesn't excuse unkindness. I hope you can learn from this. Before Jessica could respond, the cafe door swung open once more, and an older woman entered. Jessica gasped, her eyes wide. Mom? The woman's face mirrored Jessica's shock, and it was clear she recognized Henry immediately. Mr. Wallace, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. I can't believe it's you. You were my favorite teacher. You changed my life. Henry, taken aback, smiled warmly. It's wonderful to see you again. I remember you well. You had such a bright spirit. Jessica's mother looked at her daughter, then back at Henry. I owe so much of who I am to you. Jessica, you have no idea how special he is. Jessica's eyes filled with tears as the realization sank in. I didn't know. I didn't mean to hurt someone who meant so much to us. Henry extended his hand towards Jessica, a gesture of forgiveness and understanding. You have the chance to learn from this, Jessica. Embrace the lessons life throws at you and remember that kindness is a choice we can all make. In that moment, a sense of hope enveloped the cafe, uniting the three of them in a shared understanding of growth, redemption, and the power of connection. If this story touched your heart, then you belong to a special group of people who still believe in kindness and respect. Don't miss out on more stories like this. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell. And if you know someone who needs to hear this lesson, share this video with them. Let's remind the world that karma never forgets.